Good morning, students. My name is Mr. Ebenezer Kalola, and I'll be your marker tutor for English Module 4. So, guys, welcome to the subject English 4. And in this module, we are going to acquaint you with the features and structure of the English language. We're going to look at the underlying rules that govern the English language. Upon the completion of this module, you should be able to discuss the elements of and perspective of literature. You should be able to explain and analyze features of novels and drama. You should also be able to analyze and teach poetry. You should be able to explain categories and criteria of visual literacy. And you will also be expected to study aspects of teaching methodology throughout the module. So, for assessment, you'll be required to do one assignment of 150 marks, which must be submitted for this module. A pass mark of 50% is required in this assignment to get admission to the examination. The examination question paper will have the same format as the assignment. It will count for 150 marks and has a 3-hour duration. A final pass mark of 50% is being required, which comprises of 60% of the written examination plus 40% of the assignment or the semester mark. So in this PowerPoint presentation, we are going to cover 3 units. Unit 1, which is elements of and perspective on literature. Unit 2, which is the features of novels and dramas. Unit 3, which is the analysis of and teaching of poetry. So the first thing we're going to look at is what we call literary device. So we say to successfully interpret and analyze literary device, you first need to have a solid foundation in literary terms and their definitions. In this tutorial, you get help to get familiar with most commonly used literary device in prose and poetry. We're going to give you a clear definition of each of the terms we discuss, along with examples of literary elements and the context in which they most often appear. Literary device refers to the typical structure used by writers in their works to convey his or her message in a simple manner to the reader. So when you employ them properly, the different literary device help the reader to appreciate, interpret, and analyze a literary work. So, if you employ a literary device properly in your writing, or if a writer employs a literary device properly in their writing, it makes it easier for the reader to understand their work. So, literary devices are techniques that writers use to create a special and important effect in their writing, so that they can convey information or to help readers understand their writing on a deeper level. So, they are like tour guides. They are like tour guides that writers make use of, so that they can help us to understand the meaning in their writing. So you must be able to identify them so that you can understand the motivation behind the author's choice. So the first one you're going to look at is what we call allegory. An allegory is a story that is used to represent a more general message about real life, historical issues, or events. It is typically an entire book, a novel, or play. For instance, I hope you all know George Orwell, right? And we all read the book, The Animal Farm. For instance, George Orwell's dystopian book, Animal Farm, sorry. For instance, George Orwell's dystopian book, Animal Farm, is an allegory for the event preceding the Russian Revolution and the Stalinist era in the early 20th century of Russia. In the story, animals on a farm practice animalism, which is essentially communism. Remember, communism is mostly associated with Russia. Many characters correspond to actual historical events. All major represent both the founder of communism, Karl Marx, and the Russian communist leader, Vladimir Lenin. The farmer, Miss Jones, is the Russian Tsar, and the boar Napoleon stand for Joseph Stalin. And the pig, Snowball, represent Leon Trotsky. So all the animals in Animal Farm, they represent people that they represent figures. They represent important figures in the communism theory. And then we have alliteration. Alliteration is a series of words or phrases that all or almost all start with the same sound. These words are typical consonants to give more stress to the syllables. You often come across alliteration in poetry, titles of books and poems, such as in Jane Austen. She's a fan of this literary device. For instance, if you look at the title of the book, Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, these titles, they make use of alliteration. Pride and Prejudice. At the beginning of this title, we find the same consonant sound. The P sounds in Pride and Prejudice. It's a consonant sound, and also sense and sensibility. Those are consonant sound. The S sound that is found at the beginning of these words. For instance, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. In this tongue twister, the P sound is repeated at the beginning of all major words. And then we have what we call allusion. Allusion is when an author makes an indirect reference to a figure, place, event, or idea originating from outside the context. Many allusions make reference to previous works of literature or art. For instance, stop acting so smart. It sounds like you are Einstein or something. This is an allusion to the famous real-life theoretical physicist Albert Einstein. And then we have anaphora. Anaphora is when a word or phrase is repeated at the beginning of multiple sentences throughout a piece of writing. It's used to emphasize the repeated phrase and evoke strong feelings in the audience. For instance, a famous example of anaphora is found in Winston Churchill's "We shall fight on the beaches." We shall fight on the beaches speech. Throughout this speech, he repeats the phrase "We shall fight," while listing numerous places where the British Army will continue battling World War II. He did this to rally both troops and the British people and to give them confidence that they will still win the war. So, Winston used the phrase "We shall fight" in almost every sentence in his speech, so that he can evoke strong feelings in the audience and to give them motivation and confidence that at the end of the battle they will win the fight. And then we have colloquialism. Colloquialism is the use of informal language and slang. It's often used by authors to lend a sense of realism to their characters and dialogue. Forms of colloquialism includes words, phrases, and contractions that aren't real words, such as gonna and ain't. For instance, "Hey, what's up, man?" This piece of dialogue is an example of colloquialism since it uses common everyday words and phrases, namely "what's up" and "man." And we have epigraph is another example of a literary device. An epigraph is when an author inserts a famous quotation, poem, or song, or other short passage or text at the beginning of a larger text, example in a book or chapter, etc. An epigraph is typically written by a different writer with credit given. So when you're going to use an epigraph, you must give credit to the author of that quotation or of the poem or song. And it is used as a way to introduce an overarching theme or message in the work. Some pieces of literature, such as Herman Melville's 1851 novel Moby Dick, I hope you have all read that book, incorporate multiple epigraphs throughout. For instance, at the beginning of Ernest Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises, is an epigraph that consists of a quotation from the poet Gertrude Stein, which reads, "You are all a lost generation. In a past, you are all a lost generation." And you also find a passage from the Bible. And we have an epistrophe. An epistrophe is similar to an anaphora, but in this case, the repeated word or phrase appears at the end of a successful statement. Like anaphora, it is used to invoke an emotional response from the audience. In Lyndon B. Johnson's speech, the American Promise, he repeats the word "problem" in the use of epistrophe. There is no Negro problem, there is no Southern problem, there is no Northern problem, there is only an American problem. So, in his speech, he used of the word "problem" to invoke response from the audience and also to rally the people together. So there is no individual problems. every problem what he was trying to say is that every problem that is faced by the black people, every problem that is faced by the Southern people, every problem that was faced by the Northern problem, it is all American problem. It all affects them all as a nation. And then we have euphemism. Euphemism is when a more mild or indirect word expression is used in place of another word or phrase that is considered harsh, blunt, vulgar, or unpleasant. For instance, I'm sorry, but he didn't make it. The phrase "didn't make it" is a more polite and less blatant way of saying that someone has died. Or for instance, he kicked the bucket. He kicked the bucket. It is also an euphemism to say that somebody has passed away. And then we have hyperboles. A hyperbole is an exaggerated statement that's not meant to be taken literally by the reader. It is often used for a comedic effect or emphasis. For instance, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. The reader does not mean that he's going to eat the horse literally. But his hyperbole emphasizes that he is very hungry or that he is starved. And then we have imagery. Imagery is when an author describes a scene, an object or idea so that it appeals to our senses: taste, smell, sight, touch, or hearing. This device is often used to help the reader clearly visualize parts of the story by creating a strong mental picture. Whenever you are reading a novel or a poem and the writer has used imagery, what do? You create images in your mind. You create images in your mind because of the words that were used by the writer. That is why we find most people, whenever they are reading novels, they don't want to be disturbed. Because for them, when they're reading a novel, it is like they are watching a movie. It's like they are watching a movie because they can visualize what is being said in the what is written in that novel. For example, here's an example of imagery taken from William Wordsworth's famous poem, "I Wander Lonely as a Cloud." When all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. In this poem, William Wordsworth has used imagery. And when you're reading it, you visualize what he's saying. You visualize a crowd. You visualize golden daffodils. You visualize a lake that is beneath trees. And you also visualize a breeze. And then we have irony. Irony is when a statement is used to express an opposite meaning than the one literally expressed by it. There are three types of irony in literature. We have verbal irony, when somebody says something but means the opposite. It is similar to sarcasm. And I hope you guys know what is sarcasm. We'll go look at it at a later stage. And then we have situational irony. Situational irony is when something happens which is the opposite of what was expected or intended to happen. And we have dramatic irony, and this is when the audience is aware of the true intentions or outcomes, while the characters are not. As a result, certain actions and or events take on different meanings for the audience than they do for the characters involved. So, example of this irony. So, an example of a verbal irony. One example of this type of irony can be found in Edgar Allan Poe's short story, which is The Cask of Amontillado. In this short story, a man named Montresor plans to get revenge on another man named Fortunado. As a toast, Montresor says, "And I, Fortunado, I drink to your long life." This statement is irony because we the reader already know that by this point, Montresor plans to kill Fortunado. You see, this character plans to kill another character, but then he toasts to the another character's life. So there's a verbal irony there. And then we have situational irony. Example of this is a girl wakes up late for school and quickly rushes to get there, but then as soon as she arrived, though she realized that it's Saturday and there is no school. So this girl wakes up and then she assumes that she's very late. and she quickly rushes to get to school. But when she gets to school, she realizes that today is Saturday. There is no school, which is a situational irony. And then dramatic irony is found in William Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. Romeo commits suicide in order to be with Juliet. However, the audience, unlike poor Romeo, knows that Juliet is not actually dead, but just asleep. That is dramatic irony. And then we have juxtaposition, which is the comparison and contrastion of two or more different ideas, characters, and objects. This literary device is often used to create a clear picture of the characteristic of one subject or ideas by comparing it with those of another. Example, one of the most literary examples of juxtaposition is the opening passage from Charles Dickens's novel, A Tale of Two Cities. So in this tale of two cities, it says, it was the best of time, it was the worst of time. This is already juxtaposition here. This is a comparison of two of opposite ideas, best time and worst time. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. Here again, there's a comparison and contraction of two different ideas, wisdom and foolishness. It was the epoch of life, it was the epoch of incredulity. Again here we find a juxtaposition. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. Light and darkness are two opposite things. And then again, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. Here again we find juxtaposition, which is a comparison of two opposite things. And then we have metaphor or simile. Metaphors are when ideas, action, or objects are described in non-literal terms. In short, it's when an author compares one thing to another. The two things being described usually share something in common but are unlike in all the other respects. A simile is a type of metaphor in which an object, idea, character, action, etc. is compared to one thing, using words such as like or as. Both metaphors and simile are often used in writing for clarity or emphasis. For instance, what lights through your window breaks? It is the east and Juliet is the sun. In this line from Romeo and Juliet, Romeo compares Juliet to the sun. However, because Romeo doesn't use the word as or like, it is a metaphor. Again, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east and Juliet is the sun. So in this sentence, Romeo is comparing Juliet to the sun. And then we have, she is vicious as a lion. She is vicious as a lion. Remember we said when it comes to similar, we use words such as or like. Since this statement uses the word as to make a comparison between she and the lion, it is a similar. And then we have a metonym. A metonym is when a related word or phrase is substituted for the actual thing to which it is being referred. This device is usually used for poetic or rhetoric effect. For instance, the pen is mightier than the word. This statement, which was coined by Edward Bulwer Lytton in 1839, contains two examples of metonymy. The pen refers to the written word, and the sword refers to military force or violence. And then we have onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a word or group of words that represents a sound and actually resembles or imitates the sound it stands for. It is often used for dramatic or realistic or poetic effect. So these are words such as buzz, boom, chip, creak, sizzle, zoom, and etc. And then we have oxymoron. An oxymoron is a combination of two words that together express contradictory meaning. This device is often used for emphasis, for humor, to create tension, also to illustrate a paradox. For instance, we have deafening silence, organized chaos, cruelly kind, insanely logic. If you look at the word deafening silence, these two words, they express contradictory meaning. These two words are opposite, deafening silence. And then we have organized chaos. How can chaos be organized? We have cruelly kind. We have insanely logic. So these are two words. These are two words that express contradictory meaning. And then we have a paradox, which is a statement that appears illogical or self-contradictory, but upon investigation may actually be true or plausible. Note that a paradox is different from an oxymoron. A paradox is an entire phrase or sentence, whereas an oxymoron is a combination of just two words. So the difference between a paradox and an oxymoron is this. When it comes to a paradox, it is an entire phrase or sentence, while an oxymoron is just two words that are combined. For instance, here's a famous paradoxical sentence. This statement is false. If the statement is true, then it isn't actually false, as it suggests. But then if it's false, then the statement is true. First, this statement is a paradox because it is both true and false at the same time. And then we have personification. Personification is when a non-human figure or other abstract concept or element is described as having human-like qualities or characteristics. Unlike anthropomorphisms, when non-human figures become human-like characters with personification, the object of figure is simply described as human-like. So when it comes to personification, it is used to help the reader create a clear mental picture of the same object being described. For instance, the wind moaned. The wind moaned, beckoning me to come outside. In this sense, we have personified the wind. We are saying that the wind is mourning. We give the wind a human characteristic. And then we have satire. Satire is a genre of writing that criticizes something such as a person, behavior, belief, government, or society. Satire often employs irony, humor, and hyperbole to make its point. For example, The Union is a satirical newspaper and digital media company. It uses satire to parody common news features such as opinion columns, editorial cartoons, and clickbait headlines. Okay, let's look at the benefits of utilizing literature in English language teaching. So what are these benefits of using literature in English language teaching? So what the first benefit is that it provides opportunity for multi-sensorial classroom experience. It appeals to learners with different learning styles, and text can be supplemented to enhance the richness of the sensory input the student receive. Literary text or literature offer a resource for linguistic input. Whenever you employ literature in your language teaching, what do? You are feeding your students or your learners with linguistic inputs. Students pick up new words. They pick up literary devices. They pick up metaphors and similes that they can use in their everyday conversation. They also help learners practice all four language skills in grammatical structures and new vocabulary. I've talked about vocabulary, like when you teach students literature, they pick up new words. They also help learners develop understanding of cultures. And they become aware of differences and develop tolerance and understanding. So, in other words, literature helps us to teach intercultural communication. It helps us to teach intercultural communication. When our learners go out in the society, and then they meet somebody from a different culture, they will learn to accept them and not judge them because they are different from them. Literature also covers universal themes. Literature talks about joy, it talks about sadness, it talks about death, it talks about life, it talks about every aspect of life. And hence it covers universal themes. And all these themes, they are all the same, no matter where we come from. The theme of death is the same in the north, it's the same in the south, it is the same in Europe. So by teaching literature, we are teaching our students all of these universal themes. So we also said the representational language of literary text involves the learners and engage their emotions. When you teach literature, we are going to engage students' emotions. We also come across what we call cathasis. When a student read a book and then they come across something that that touches them, what do? They go through what we call cathasis. They go through what we call purgations. We engage their emotions. It also engages their cognitive faculties. Literary work helps learners to use their imagination. It enhances empathy amongst learners toward others. It also gives learners an opportunity to learn literary devices. So we have different types of poetry. We have ballads, we have epics, we have straightforward narratives, and we also have epics. So ballads are simple tale told in simple verse. They are meant to be sung. So if you're going to recite a ballad, you must sing it. And then we have epics. Epics are long narrative poems that deals with heroes or mythical events. And then we have straightforward narratives. These are poems that tells a story, but they are not considered ballads or epics. And then we have epics again. These are long narrative. I've covered this already. Just a repetition. Yes, sorry for that. And then we have different types of novels. We have realistic novels, whereby the characters are rooted in social class. They live in developed social structures. They interact with other characters and have believable everyday experiences. So realistic novels covers like everything that happens in our lives. What you read in the novel, it is what is happening in our society. For instance, if you read the book The Paper Violent of Oshanto, in that book, it talks about gender-based violence. It talks about patriarchy, and these are things that is happening in our Namibian societies. And that book is a realistic novel. And then we have a social novel. The social novel and economic condition in a specified era and its influence on the characters form the basis of this type of a novel. Very often, the phases of the novel will propagate political and social reform. And then we have historian novel. And then we say the setting and the characters are taken from history. In some of these novels, the author uses the characters in the action to portray what was regarded as the forces which drove the historical process. An example of a historical novel I can give is the book The Pride and the Prejudice, The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe. These are historical novels. And then we have epistolatory novel. This is a novel in which the story unfolds in letters written between characters. So it is a novel in dialogues, whereby we have letters being written back and forth between characters. And then we also have regional drama. And we said that the novel is based in the social structure, social setting, speech, and custom of a particular place or setting. The setting is an important condition as it affects the temperament of the characters and their thoughts, their feelings, and interaction with one another. Moving on, we're also going to talk about how to analyze a poem, because in this module, you're going to teach us to, after the completion of this module, you are going to teach poetry. You're going to teach us, your learners on how to analyze a poem. Even you are supposed to know how to analyze a poem. So the first step when it comes to analyzing a poem, the first step is this. You must read the poem and take notes. Read the poem and then you take notes. The second step, identify the title hints of the poem. What does the title tell you about a poem? The third step, you must find the literal meanings that are found in the poem. Try to pick out the literary device that are used in the poem, and then see why. And then ask yourself, why was this literary device used? What effect did this literary device bring in the poem? You must also try to identify the narrator, the characters, and the setting of the poem. You must also look at the structure of the poem. And then the sixth step, you must make a summary of the poem. And then step 7, which I've already talked about, identify the literary device used in the poem and their effect on the poem. Step 8, identify the theme of the poem. So with that, guys, we've come to the end of our presentation. And if you have any query, if you have any question, if you have anything that you need to be clarified on, please do not hesitate to contact me on my cell phone number that is being displayed on the PowerPoint, or send me an email on the email that is also being displayed on the PowerPoint. With that, guys, thank you very much, and I wish you the best with your assignments and also with your examination. With that, goodbye.